Hero, if you have been to a Passover Seder before, you may have noticed that the number 4 comes up quite a bit. There are 4 questions, at least. There are 4 types of sons or 4 types of children who are described that model different modes of learning about Passover. Today, we are going to talk about the 4 cups of wine that are traditionally drunk during a Passover Seder. Where do we get the number 4? What's the reason for this? We'll learn more about that right after this bass. I should get some music in there instead of just doing my lame beatboxing. Hey everybody, it's me, sorry, just learning how to do internet stuff. It's me, your friendly neighborhood rabbi, John Carrier, and today we're going to be talking about the 4 cups of wine that we have at the Passover Seder. Where do we get this number from? When do we do these 4 cups of wine? Does it have to be wine? Can it be grape juice or even something else? We're going to talk about that today in this live studio recording of the Jew Curious show. So if you wanted to pop in and learn about all 4 cups in about 90 seconds. That's not what this show is about. We're going to hang out for a while. I'm going to give a longer explanation, more in-depth. You can find short videos on stuff elsewhere on YouTube. Here, we're really going to unpack this. There's actually a number of different reasons given for why we might have 4 cups at the Passover Seder, and I want to make sure you know when in the Seder those 4 cups are drunk. And people often ask, does it have to be wine? What if I'm allergic to grapes? Or what if I'm in recovery and I don't want to have alcohol? Can I do something else? We'll get into all that in just a bit. Just so you're familiar with the format of this show, if you haven't been to one of these before, we're going to be here for, 30, 40 minutes or an hour or something as a way to record this for the Jew Curious Show podcast. And I love to do this with a live studio audience. So if you're watching live, I really appreciate your being here. And then I'll give a little bit of a talk here in a second. And then you ask whatever questions you want about that talk. And if you have other pressing questions about Passover, happy to answer those questions as well. It's getting into crunch time. First Seder is this Friday night. I still have to clean my house. So I might cut this video short just to start, sweeping crumbs out of my cabinets. We'll see what happens. But I've done my intro, and I'm going to take a little bit of a silence print here. If you're familiar with this ritual, if you've been here before, because the air conditioner is on. So I want to count to 10 silently so that I can make the sound better later. So let's do this. All right, here we go. So going to, let's see, again, getting into, close some browser tabs, make this video a little bit smoother, I hope. All right, just pulling up all my references here. Let's see, because I want to, there's a little bit of Torah that goes with this today, and I don't want to do it from memory. I want to pull it up so that we can learn it together. All right, let's do this. This is really good radio. So, see a lot of people in the chat. Hold on one second. Somebody is messaging me, and it might be urgent. This again is... All right. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to my friend Hamad, who is on the brink of something to change his status in a very important way in his life, and I want to send out prayers to Hamad. Hamad, if you watch this, know that I saw the message, buddy, and I am praying for you, and I trust that you'll be successful with God's help and your own ingenuity, which I'm very familiar with. I think you're going to do great. So let's jump back into this recording of the show, and it sounds a little bit something like this. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble, for those wonderful, inspiring, and kosher LePesach opening beats. Thank you to the live studio audience who is here today with us. I see BDC MD. I don't know if that's from Maryland or a doctor. I see Trig. I see KG Wilcox is back with us. Who else is joining us? Milo from Denmark. We are international. And Val as well. Nice to see you, Val. Great to see everybody in the live studio audience today. Many familiar faces and maybe some first-timers in here as well. If you're lurking, it's okay. Go ahead, lurk. I'm happy to have you here in any case. But if you are brave and you ask a question or just say hello to us, know that you will be contributing to this podcast. Because if you have a question, other people have that question as well. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. If you haven't already, I would ask you to consider subscribing to this podcast. That's just tapping a little button on your phone or other podcast listening device. That way you will automagically download all future episodes and have complete easy access to all of our 30 plus, almost 40 episodes at this point. I'm pretty psyched about that. But all those will be at your fingertips. All you have to do is subscribe and then put the phone in your pocket, set it on your dashboard out of reach so you can settle in to this conversation about the 4 cups of wine traditionally drunk at a Passover Seder. One thing I do want to mention is that this podcast is made possible by the students of the Jew Curious School. If you would like to take your Jewish learning to the next level with Jew curious people just like you and access to a rabbi who gets you, then the Jew Curious School might be right for you. We have 3 live classes every week on the Torah portion of the week, on an intensive topic of the month, as well as our ongoing Introduction to Judaism class. But my favorite thing about the Jew Curious School is the community forum where students just like you can share your questions, share your concerns, share your challenges along your path. But what I'm most proud of about this community is how these nice people support each other in their journey, giving their props, giving their high fives, being a shoulder, and being an encouraging word when you need it. You can learn more about that at jewcurious.school/info. So let's see who's in the chat and how people are doing today. Karen from Philly, nice to see you. I always call you by your handle, KG Wilcox, but try to remember from now on this is that KG Wilcox is Karen from Philadelphia, the city of siblingly love. Once again, I'm a bit of an egalitarian. Trig asks, quick question. If you are strapped for cash and can't afford to replace what you get rid of in honor of Passover, can you pack up those things and relocate them off your property? You absolutely may. The idea is that you're not supposed to eat Chametz. You're not supposed to be able to see Chametz. So packing it up would eliminate it from your field of vision. The trick is you're also not supposed to own Chametz. And so even if you own a bag of Wonder Bread or something, and but it's sitting on the other side of the country for whatever reason that would happen. Maybe you left it on a flight and it's being returned to you. I don't know if they return bread. In any case, what you can do is temporarily sell that by an arrangement that the rabbis came up with many, many centuries ago, whereby if we have Chametz, and it would be a financial hardship, and I mean a serious hardship on people to have to replace all of that Chametz after Passover. Well, Jews have always been human beings with human needs, and so we found a way to make this work so that people aren't impoverished by celebrating the holiday. And so what you can do is you can contact a rabbi. Usually, it doesn't have to be a rabbi necessarily, but many synagogues do this. They arrange the sale of Chametz for people who are trying to get rid of their Chametz but need it back after Passover. You can temporarily sell the Chametz to a non-Jewish person who's not obligated by the rules of Pesach, but you're not selling it for like a profit. It's not eBay, something like that. It is a temporary arrangement whereby you have a contract for sale that they take your Chametz and then they sell it back to you for the exact same amount at the end of Pesach. So no money actually changes hands, but legally the Chametz belongs to someone else. Not for nothing, one of our most successful rabbis back in the time of the Talmud was a brewer, right? He made beer and he had lots of sons and he was fabulously wealthy. But if you're a brewer, You have a lot of stock of beer that's in various levels of fermentation over the course of weeks or months, and getting rid of all that would crush your business. You would be out of business. If you're in the distilling business, if you're making liquor out of barley and things like that, like whiskey, for example, that has to sit in a cask for a long time over a period of many, many years, you could sell that whiskey back and forth for years while it is aging. And people recognize that if we had to get rid of all of our chametz and not own it but never get it back again, this would be devastating for people's livelihoods. And Judaism is something that's supposed to support your prosperity, not devastate it. And so it is that. So we came up with this thing that for some people seems like, kind of a legalism, kind of a workaround, kind of silly, a little bit cynical. However, for me, this custom that we have of selling chametz and then buying it back again and having this arrangement shows us that living an observant Jewish life, doing our very best to do what God wants of us, is for human beings. It's not for saints. Right? It says in the book of Deuteronomy, do not think that the Torah is in heaven, that you can't reach it, or across the sea, that you can't access it. It should be accessible to everyone. And so this is our way that we can do that. Somebody asked me this in the live session yesterday. Would I be willing to broker a transaction of chametz? Still looking into that, but God willing, before Pesach, take a look at that tonight, maybe by tomorrow's show, about the 4 types of questions that we have on Pesach, or maybe by tomorrow's show on the 4 questions, I'll have a form up for selling chametz. So still looking into that for people who need to do that. If you can't wait, contact your local rabbi, say, I have some chametz for sale. Usually they like a little bit of a donation just because it's nice to donate money to a synagogue for brokering this transaction. But other than that, other than a donation as your heart moves you, this is not going to be a hardship for people. So my wife buys bread by the 50-pound bag because she likes to bake bread. Or excuse me, my wife buys flour by the 50-pound bag because she likes to bake bread. It would be a hardship for us to have to throw all that out and then buy it back again after Passover. And so we enter into this arrangement as well. Let's see if there are any other quick questions before we get into... Let's see if we get into any, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, this is the benefit of live recording. Sometimes I have stumbles and burps and blips and things like that. That's why I love editing software before I put stuff out into the world. But I also love live because you get the benefit of my silliness. So we got people sharing with Trig various strategies for selling chametz. All right, so let's jump into it. I see that, let's see, I see that Miriam has joined us. And William as well. So glad to have everybody here. Let's get into it. There are, you may have seen or heard or witnessed or drank yourself, 4 cups of wine traditionally served at the Passover Seder. And these are 4 cups that are drunk throughout the Seder, throughout the order of the evening. You can drink more than that. It's entirely okay, but you have to drink at least these 4 at proper times. And the proper times are these. It's done right in the beginning of a Passover Seder, in the Kadesh portion. So in the Kadesh portion, or the Kiddush, anytime we initiate the celebration of a holiday, we make Kiddush. The Kiddush means sanctification, usually done with a cup of wine, but just to be clear, we are not blessing the wine or transubstantiating it or changing its status in any way, although even Jews today say, oh, it's time to bless the wine. We're not blessing wine, we are blessing God. In all of our blessings, we're never blessing the thing that we're doing or the stuff that we're eating. We are blessing God for providing those things. And so to initiate Passover, we say Kiddush, which means sanctifying the day. We bless God who gives us holy days, especially this holy time of Pesach, what we call Zman Cherutenu, or the season of our liberation, because we are taken out of slavery in Egypt. And so we say a special blessing and we drink some wine in the beginning of the Passover Seder. Later on, shortly before we get down to some serious eating, there is my favorite part of the Passover Seder, and that is the Magid portion. Magid means telling. That's where we actually get into telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt, how God took us out of slavery, and Moses helped. Moses was drafted for kind of a frontman spokesperson role here. But I'll also point out that in the traditional Passover Haggadah, and there are lots of different translations out there, but in the words in the Aramaic that we get from the Talmud, Moses' name is not mentioned once. It's important for us to remember that it was not Moses who took us out, but God. Moses was sort of a spokesperson and a leader in that regard, integral to the story, but it was God that did this. And in the Magid portion, where we're telling the story, we have our second cup of wine. And then we eat. Right? And this is where you can have, we'll say, spontaneous consumption of wine, if you will, if you're washing down your brisket or your Paschal yam. I know sometimes vegetarians don't have a Paschal lamb, they have a Paschal yam. Whatever it is you're eating at your Passover Seder, God willing, not Wonder Bread, you can wash it down with as much wine or whatever beverage you want to as you want to drink. But so far we've had 2 cups of wine at the Kadesh and the Magid. And then our third cup is after the meal, after the kids or whoever else find the afikomen, and we take that last bite of matzah, we get into Birkat Hamazon. This is called the Berech portion of the Passover Seder, and we do it's a customary grace after meals, just like you would do at any other meal at which you'd eaten bread with 3 or more people. But this is a special Birkat Hamazon where we mention Passover, and we also have a cup of wine as a part of this Birkat Hamazon, and that is your third cup of wine. Before we conclude the service, because it's also this long drawn out meal, but it's also a holiday service, we include Hallel. And Hallel is a collection of psalms from David, sort of an anthology of psalms and other songs that celebrate our relationship with God. We do this, you might see it in Shabbat morning services when they coincide with Rosh Chodesh, or if you go to a morning service for a holiday. In fact, we've got 4 morning services coming up for Passover in my community this Saturday and Sunday, and then the following Friday and Saturday, because those are festival days. We'll have morning services. During those morning services, we have Hallel, which is another 5, 10, 15 minutes added to the service, depending on how elaborate your musical inclinations are. But during this Hallel portion of the Seder, that's when we have our 4th cup of wine. And then we conclude with Nirtzah, which is, expressing honoring that we have done the Seder correctly and expressing the wish that we will next year do it in Jerusalem. So once again, the 4 times that we drink wine during the Seder are Kiddush, Magid, Berech, and Hallel. And so that's when we drink wine during those 4 parts of the service. You don't have to memorize that. It's in the Haggadah. It'll tell you exactly what to do, or the person leading the Seder will tell you exactly what to do. And so you don't have to memorize that. Just know that that's when we do the 4 cups. Right in the beginning, right before the meal, right after the meal, and right near the end. And so those are the 4 times that we do that. The question is, does it have to be wine? Many people can't tolerate wine, whether it's a tannin allergy or aversion, a physical aversion to alcohol. Some people are in recovery and shouldn't drink because it's unhealthy for them. And so it's been accepted for a long time that you could substitute that with grape juice. Now, there is a heavy inclination on Passover for it to be some sort of grape product, more so that when we normally do Kiddush for Shabbat or something like that, there's a lot more leeway. Traditionally, it's wine. Second place is probably grape juice. But when you're making Kiddush for Shabbat or just about any occasion, you can make Kiddush with any kind of beverage that's considered a celebratory beverage among your people. Say if you were a Jewish Viking, I don't know if that existed, but if you were like a Jewish Viking up in the North Country and grapes don't grow, you could have mead, for example. Popular among the Vikings was mead, which is fermented honey, right? Or if you, I've said this before, if you grew up in East Texas and you are accustomed to having celebrations with Dr. Pepper or a local favorite, Big Red, which is kind of this red cream soda that they drink back there. If that is the customary celebratory beverage of your people, you can make kiddush with that. The only thing you can't make kiddush with is water, because it's considered sort of too mundane. Water has other holy purposes, but not for kiddush. It turns out that on Passover, there is a strong inclination not to have those replacement beverages, but if at all possible, do something with grape, with like a grape beverage. And this was research recently by a rabbi friend of mine who is actually allergic to grapes and had to figure out what she could do. And look, again, the Torah is there for us to live by, not to die by. If you absolutely cannot consume grapes at all, then an acceptable substitute is just be present for the various times when they're saying B'rei Pri Hagafen, or they're making the blessing with the wine there. Say Amen. So somebody else would lead the Kiddush, or somebody else will lead one of those other one of the other drinking sessions. And if somebody has a cup of wine, they make the blessing over the wine, and you say Amen to that blessing, it's as if you have fully participated. And so if you can drink the 4 cups of wine, drink 4 cups of wine. If it needs to be grape juice, it can be grape juice. If you can't have either, just say Amen when somebody says the blessing, and you are fine. And so I just wanted to make sure all the options were available to people, because I know this is a big concern for some folks. Let's see. People are asking about how much constitutes a cup. So in halachic measurement, when you're making a blessing with wine, if you want to do the full Monty, having been considered drank your 4 cups, and you're don't need some sort of workaround for health reasons, let's say. What constitutes a cup is a revi'it, and that is, again, that's a Talmudic measure that I believe is approximately 3.3 ounces, or let's say like a good solid mouthful or a cheekful, something like that. Like if it has to be a sip, it has to be a sip. But what we also like to do is when we have the 4 cups, they should be distinct in the sense that you shouldn't say the blessing twice over the same exact liquid. Right. This is considered sort of a blessing in vain, or an extraneous blessing. And so if you're only going to have a sip, you should replace the liquid with different liquid before you make the blessing again. That's just if you want to really be, according to Hoyle, or do it by the book. However you get it done is fine. But if you want to do it in the traditional way, it should be approximately 3.3 ounces per blessing session, and that should be a distinct 3.3 ounces every single time. Now, again, if many times at the table there will be, especially if it's not a big drinking crowd, and that's okay, maybe the person leading the Seder will have a Kiddush cup that has a quantity of a revi'it or more, and then other people will have little cups, right? And like the little shot glasses or something like that. That is fine. The person who's drinking from the Kiddush cup has fully accomplished that revi'it, and everybody else, whatever you're drinking, is fine too if you're just taking a little sip. That is okay. But if you want to know the halachic measure of what constitutes a cup when it comes to drinking for an occasion, it is a revi'it, or like I said, approximately 3.3 ounces, something like that. So that's the according to Hoyle version of doing this, or halacha, as you might say in Hebrew. Somebody says kosher grape pop. Interesting. I don't know that I've ever had kosher grape pop. I've had I've had various kosher for Passover sodas, and where kashrut for sodas gets into it is, especially if you're not eating kitniot, you should be looking for soda pop that's made of sugar, not of corn syrup, for example. If you can find kosher grape pop, let me know, because it may be made of grapes. Sometimes soda isn't made exactly out of the stuff that it's supposed to flavor it. William asks, again, Rabbi, does one have to drink the full cup of wine? Not necessarily, but if you can't drink the full cup, then I suggest getting smaller cups so that you're not making blessings over the same juice over and over again. So once again, if you can't drink wine, That's okay. Some people have a serious aversion to it. Some people shouldn't drink alcohol based on medication or other health issues, and some people shouldn't drink alcohol for the health reason of recovery. So there are lots of alternatives there. So let's get into why four cups. And I want to read a little passage here. There are many different reasons given for why we have the four cups, and so sometimes you wonder, if the truth only requires one story. So if there are multiple reasons, is this really stable, and is there one single right reason? I'll say we have this four cups going back a very long time. And over the years, different authorities have invested different symbolism in it. The sort of basic reason given for why we have four cups is there's a passage in Exodus, big surprise. Exodus weighs heavily into the story of Passover because the story of Passover comes from the narrative in the book of Exodus where God took us out of Egypt. And the most fundamental reason given for the four cups is that in Sefer Shemot, in the book of Exodus, in chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, it gives us, this is where God says, I am going to take the children of Israel out of Egypt. But he doesn't just say take. God actually uses four different verbs. Let's see, what does it say here? Lachen emor livnei Yisrael, therefore say to the children of Israel, Ani Adonai, I am God, v'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, right? And I'm going to bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So I'm going to bring you out. That's one. V'hitzalti etchem me'avodatam, and I'm going to deliver you from their enslavement of you. V'ga'alti etchem bizroa nituya, and I'm going to redeem you with an outstretched arm, ovasaftim gedolim, and with great judgments. So we've got so far in verse 6, God's going to bring us out from under the burdens of Egypt, will deliver us from enslavement to them, will redeem us with an outstretched arm and great judgments. And finally in verse 7, V'lakachti etchem li la'am, and I will take you to me for a people. So God brings us out of Egypt, delivers us from slavery, redeems us, it improves our situation, sort of takes us like one would redeem a captive or pay ransom, for somebody who's been kidnapped, and will take us into God's own fold, will sort of restore us to that status of covenant. Because we have these four verbs, bring out, deliver, redeem, and take, we drink 4 cups of wine during the Passover Seder. That's sort of the original reason given. Over the centuries of rabbinic study and commentary, there have been other reasons given. The Maharal of Prague, who was a scholar, in medieval times in Prague, Rabbi Lowe, I think was his name, says that this represents the 4 matriarchs, right? Just as we have the three matzot on the table, that many people look at the 3 matzot and say, that makes sense that these are the patriarchs. This is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. So the 3 matzahs are our 3 forefathers, and the 4 cups of wine are our 4 mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, or Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So we got the whole family on the table at once. We've got the 3 matzot for the 3 patriarchs and the 4 cups of wine for the 4 matriarchs. Both of these things integral to the Passover Seder, even though their time was well before the story of the Exodus. It was through their lives that we have this covenant with God that called out to God to come take us out of slavery. So we would not have been able to come out of slavery had God not had that relationship with our 3 forefathers and our 4 foremothers. There are other later medieval explanations, like Abravanel says that these are the 4 different redemptions of the Jewish people. One was that original relationship with Abraham. Because God made a covenant with Abraham, all of his descendants, both genetic and intellectual, would be redeemed from a world that was, let's say, less punctilious about holiness than the Jewish people. That's the first redemption. The second redemption, of course, is the Exodus itself. The third redemption is that God would look after us in our time of exile. And the fourth redemption we haven't had yet, but this is sort of our Olam Haba, or our end of days, or, ultimately when the age of the Mashiach comes, that will be our fourth redemption. And it's for this reason that we set out a fifth cup. As a matter of fact, even though that's the fourth cup, is that sort of end of times redemption. Accompanied to that is the fifth cup as well, which is the Kos Eliyahu, the cup that we set out for the prophet Elijah, who is traditionally thought to be sort of the front man or herald or forerunner of Mashiach. And that particular redemption is believed to be scheduled for Passover. This Passover? I don't know, maybe. Next Passover? I don't know about that either. 1,000 years from now? Perhaps. Who knows? So Passover, though, is intricately connected to the Messianic age, or Olam Haba, however you want to put that. So these are all different explanations. We have the four verbs that God uses to say what God will do with us to free us from slavery. We have the four foremothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And we have these four sort of historical, let's say, high points of redemption. The original covenant with the original covenant with Abraham, the Exodus, the redemption that happens during the Exodus, the redemption sort of ongoing, that we are protected while in exile until the coming of the Messiah, and the coming of the Messiah itself will be its own form of redemption. And so these are the different reasons given for why we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder. And I said earlier that there's a strong inclination toward having this be grape stuff. However, I've heard a couple of different stories, one ancient and one modern, for possible substitutes that I want to share with you because I think they're hilarious. One is a friend of mine who, going back many years, he was in recovery and would, not have wine, but he would tell stories about, wine and things like that. And he told a story from the time of the Talmud where there was a rabbi who was given during a Passover Seder a glass of date beer. And this is beer made of date syrup. Again, it's kosher for Passover. It's not barley beer, but I learned this from my days in home brewing and mead making way back when, that if you have sugar and water and yeast, you can make hooch out of anything. So at some point, somebody fermented date syrup or syrup from dates and created an alcoholic beverage out of it and served it to this particular rabbi at a Seder, and he loved it. He said, "This is delicious. From now on, for all of my students, I declare that every Passover henceforth, everyone is required to have date beer as their 4 cups." And he had at least 4 cups of it, and perhaps more, and then gave this proclamation. However, the next day, he woke up and he didn't feel as kindly toward date beer as he had when he went to bed and or passed out. And he felt so ill that he sent out a second proclamation: "For all of my students, from henceforth you are forbidden from having date beer as part of your Passover Seder, much less the 4 cups." Point of fact, actually, I think last year or the year before, I found some date beer and tried it. And I am of the latter opinion that nobody should drink this stuff because it tastes like shampoo. However, you do you. If you want to find kosher for Passover beer, I've heard they've tried to make this a couple of times. For regular beer drinkers, Passover can be difficult because beer is not kosher for Passover. It's largely made out of barley or other things that you can't have on Passover. And so people will say, okay, I need some sort of beer substitute during Passover, because they'll make Passover versions of just about anything you can find. And so they made like a hopped mead that I heard was disgusting. But I actually have tried the date beer, and likewise, I don't recommend it. So if you want to try it, try it. You may like it. Some people like the taste of shampoo. I do not. So we'll move on from there. That was more of an ancient story, and one that I shared, I believe, the other day. Was there was a rabbi recently, and I think this was a rabbi from Colorado, and in Colorado, my understanding is that cannabis is legal now. So this rabbi tried some because it's natural stuff. God gave this to us. It was legal to do. He wasn't violating the prohibition. Dina de malchut dina. You have to follow the laws of your land. The laws of the land said that this was permissible. He found nothing unkosher about it, so he tried it. And he too said, okay, from now on, people should consider, instead of having the 4 cups, perhaps the 4 joints. Like wine, it brings people joy, in moderation. It inspires curiosity. It certainly can animate a discussion. Carl Sagan, I think, said the same thing about this stuff. But likewise, if you have one rabbi accept something, another rabbi will forbid it. Some rabbi looked at it and said, it's got seeds in it, therefore it's kitniot, like mustard or things like that. So there have been alternative, acceptable or somewhat acceptable things to use for the 4 cups throughout rabbinic history. So I just wanted to share that with you. Typically, it's wine or grape juice. If you can't tolerate either of those things, have another beverage, but say amen when people are making kiddush, and you are doing just fine. Caleb shares, try knee-high grape soda. I remember knee-high from the Southwest. Sparkling grape soda, which is basically just carbonated grape juice for the most part. You can get, when you're in the Passover aisle, they have the Manischewitz wine, they have the Kedem grape juice, or I don't know if Manischewitz makes grape juice, but they have the kosher grape juice, and they have this stuff that comes in something that looks a little bit like a champagne bottle that is sparkling grape juice. Totally acceptable for that. William Morales asks, why do we use non-mevushal wine for Pesach? And so I'm not familiar with the custom of using non-mevushal wine for Pesach. Most wine is mevushal. Let me take that back. Most hechshered wine that you can buy in the United States of America is what we call mevushal. Mevushal was an additional astringent. Mevushal, which means cooked or boiled, was a procedure that was added for extra stringency in the kashrut of wine. Now, the kashrut of wine is a pretty deep topic that I'm very passionate about. I've done a lot of studying about myself, and we'll get into the whole thing now. But at one point, they decided, okay, if we're going to make wine kosher, we should boil it. And not because it gets out any non-kosher cooties. The reason for this was, if we boil our wine, it will render it gross. It will basically make it unacceptable to be drunk by non-Jews. And so if we boil our wine, non-Jews won't be attracted to drinking our wine because, God forbid, we drink together and our kids marry each other. And I find, that aspect of it, I find somewhat offensive, and many other people do as well. I know a good rabbi and mentor of mine will not serve hechshered wine because it has that kind of, I'll say, divisive overtone to it. However, for many people, it's very important that their wine be 100%, or let's say 150 to 200% kosher, so they look for mevushal wine. It is possible to find hechshered, and I distinguish that from kosher wine because the hechsher, something can be kosher without having a kosher symbol on it. Just want to be clear about that. It is possible to find wine with a kosher symbol on it that is non-mevushal. Most likely, it's going to come from either a vineyard in the United States where only Jews work there, or it's going to come from a vineyard in Israel where most of the people, working in that business are Jewish. So you can find non-mevushal wine that's kosher for Passover. It will most likely come from Israel, maybe some other vineyards in California, I don't know. But for people who can taste the difference between mevushal and non-mevushal, because it's not like it's boiled in a vat for like 2 hours. It's more like it's kind of flash pasteurized, if you will, or flash boiled in a way that doesn't really affect the taste that much if you're not like a sommelier and can really tell the difference. But Trig says, yuck, that sounds gross. And that's the point. They said, okay, if we boil the wine, then other people won't want to drink it. And we don't have to worry about, could lead to mixed dancing kind of stuff, which gets us beyond what I want to talk about today. Let's see. People are asking about host and hostess gifts for Passover, things like that. If you've been invited to a Passover Seder and you want to bring something, again, we talked about this the other day, but I'll just reprise it. Don't bring food. So unless somebody is specifically asking you to bring food, don't bring food. There's been a lot of stuff prepared already. You may not be 100% clear on the different ways that you and your host observe kashrut, and so bringing food can make for an awkward situation. And I shared that one time to a Passover Seder, before I knew what I was doing, I brought some Godiva chocolates because that was like the nicest thing I could think of, not realizing that, not being kosher for Passover, my host couldn't even have them in his house. And so it was a little bit awkward there for a second. He was very gracious about it. But other things that you can bring, Trig recommends flowers. That's great. Are flowers kosher for Passover? Well, are you going to eat them? If you're not going to eat them, then you don't have to worry about it. If your flowers don't have a bunch of crumbs in them, then you don't have to worry about that either. So flowers are nice. Kathy recommends bringing a kosher cookbook. That's a great gift. Find a nice kosher cookbook, especially, there are new ones coming out all the time. Maybe your host doesn't have that yet. So bringing a kosher cookbook is a great host gift. Especially, as Trig points out, if people have allergies or sensitivities to flowers. So, if they're not allergic to books, game on. If they are allergic to books, then that's a hard way to be Jewish, but I don't judge. So just looking over this for different questions we have about this topic. Today, the number 4 appears a lot in Passover. We have the 4 cups, we have the 4 questions, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, and we have the 4 children, which we're going to talk about on Thursday. So I wanted to do some intensive Passover teaching this week. If you're sick of Passover already, hit me up after Passover, because we got a lot of Passover stuff to talk about. In fact, this week's Parshat HaShavua lesson here on YouTube will be about the Torah reading for Passover, because there is a special Torah reading for Passover. And when Passover falls on Shabbat, instead of reading part of the weekly Parsha cycle, we interrupt that cycle. We read the Parsha for Passover, only we divide it into more aliyot, so it's appropriate for Shabbat. And then after Passover, we pick up again with Achrei Mot, the next Parsha. Let's see, I have Caleb giving a shout out to Big Red. Yeah, Big Red, Caleb. I was just in Texas and I didn't find any. It was kind of an in-and-out trip, but next time, certainly. Let's see what else is going on here. I know this is bad radio, but I want to make sure I'm answering all the questions, so I'm looking through the chat. Miriam asks, what was Pharaoh's name anyway? Talking about Moses, they just call him by his title. So throughout our text, it doesn't name who Paro is. It just calls him Paro. And I say Paro instead of Pharaoh. In Hebrew, native Hebrew words almost never start with a f sound. F is what happens when a pei is in the middle of a sentence. So usually in the beginning of a sentence, it's a p sound. So we called him Paro. So yes, that was just his job title, king. And he's not really named beyond that. I think in the commentary you can find what his name actually was besides his job title. But in the text of the Torah itself, he's just Paro. Let's see. People ask you have to drink the whole cup of wine. A couple people asked that. I think we addressed that. We talked about wine and mevushal. We talked about good host gifts. Here's another question about kosher for Passover. Karen from Philly says, yogurt and canned tuna. What would make these non-KLP need to shop. And so it gets into the ingredients of the thing itself. If it has no discernible grain ingredient, if you buy them before Passover and then you betul your chametz, which is Hebrew for you cancel any grain products that are in there or sort of disavow them. There are certain things you can get that have short lists of ingredients like 100% pure coffee or milk or eggs. If you buy them for Passover, if you buy them for Passover, but you buy them if you buy them before Passover to consume during Passover, and recite the bracha of bitul chametz, or rather, and recite the formula of bitul chametz, you don't have to worry about them. So take a good look at your yogurt and canned tuna for things like grain additives, or if you're holding by kitniot, corn sweeteners and things like that. A lot of times tuna, if it has oil in it, will be made from soybean oil might be in there, and that's considered kitniot. Yogurt, if you have sweetened yogurt, it may or may not have been sweetened with corn products, and so that's kitniot as well. So these are things that might render these not kosher for Passover. So I would suggest, if you get pure yogurt that's, just milk and yogurt cultures without any kind of sweeteners or fruit or anything added to it, that's fine. Add fresh fruit on the back end if you wish. And if you're just getting tuna that's in water, then you shouldn't be running into any other added ingredients, so you don't need to worry about it. Let's see. And Kathy's talking about bitul. One of these. So I keep forgetting to bring a Haggadah. My Haggada's in the other room. I don't want to jump off camera too long, but it's all in my Passover box. So tomorrow's lesson, or the day after, before Passover, I will bring in my Haggadah. But look this up: bitul chametz, bitul or bittul, chametz, Hametz. Look that up on Google and you can find out more about it. But I'll give you the short version now. When we are preparing for Passover, so Karen from Philadelphia is asking me about bitul chametz, and we mentioned this briefly before, but I'll give you a summary of it now. When we are preparing for Passover, the first thing we do is, in addition to cleaning all of our stuff and getting rid of the obvious chametz in our pantry, we do sort of a three-part process to make sure we have all the chametz out of our possession and out of our domicile. The first is bedikat chametz. We actually search the place for any more chametz that might still be there after we thought we got rid of it all. And some people do this kind of ceremonially by putting croutons or bread cubes around and sweeping them into a spoon with a feather, those kinds of things. But we do bedikat chametz. That's one thing. The second thing is bior chametz. Any other chametz that we had left over that we found during bedikat chametz, we then burn. Ceremonially somewhat. You can throw them on the grill. You can put it on a piece of foil in your sink and just hit it with a blowtorch or something. Doesn't everyone have a culinary blowtorch? I know I love mine. It's great for creme brulee and also biur chametz. So bedikat chametz, looking for it, biur chametz, burning it, and then the last thing we do, and you try to get this done by about noontime on the day before the Passover starts that night. We do bitul chametz, which is reciting a legal formula that usually is found in the front of the Haggadah that says, any chametz that is still in my possession, I hereby disavow and consider it as the dust of the earth. And so it's no longer means anything to me. I don't own it. I certainly won't eat it if I accidentally find it. But that's sort of setting. So first you look for it, then you burn it, you physically get rid of it. And anything that you might have missed, you just mentally set that intention that it's dead to you, if you will. You sort of cancel its existence in your life. So certainly if you find any, don't eat it because you've already declared it the dust of the earth and that tastes yucky. So that's bitul chametz, God willing. So that's bitul chametz. God willing, I'll remember to bring my Haggadah. I don't have it memorized, so I'll bring my Haggadah tomorrow, maybe, or the next day, to go over that formula with people if you're really interested in it. So, Miriam asks, "Is there a certain kind of grape preferred? Merlot, Cabernet, etc." No, grapes are grapes as far as the blessing B'rei Pri Hagafen is concerned. There is a strong trend among certain traditions that red wine is preferable to white wine for kiddush purposes. Uh, I tend to ignore this when I'm doing a wedding, for example, and I say when we have kiddush at a wedding, always get white wine. You should be kosher wine, but you should be get white wine unless, of course, you're wearing a red dress. So the reason I look for white wine at weddings is, God forbid, any of it spills and gets on a white wedding dress, then it's ruined. But many people have a preference for red wine for making kiddush. But this is a cultural thing. This is a minchag. For some, it's a stringency, but you can have white wine, and that's fine too. Kathy's asking me to do an unboxing of my Passover box. So I only get to do that once a year, and it's usually in the context of a lot of hurried cleaning. But maybe this year I'll turn the camera on when I'm unboxing my Passover box, because there's all sorts of fun things in there, from dishes that I use to once a year to special like little kids cups that the kids drink out of, which are cute. There's a matzah bib in there, although my kids don't really use bibs anymore. But maybe you could see what my past. It's really not that exciting. It's just a bunch of newspaper and some dishes. So Karen's asking about kitniot again. So if, vis-a-vis the tuna and yogurt question. So if I'm cool with kitniot, corn syrup is not a problem, or soy oil. So theoretically, yes. I just say, if you want to be very punctilious about Passover, in general, processed food should be avoided, because it's hard to tell what's necessarily in there. There are many processed foods that, let me back up. So for some people, even if their ingredient kosher, will be more particular during Passover. The reason is that when we are keeping regular kosher, not Passover kosher, things can, we can make mistakes, or there can be something at the edges. For example, we have this thing called bitul bashishim, meaning that, something that doesn't belong there, if it's accidentally in there, that's fine. If it's less than 1/60th part. In Passover, we're more careful, because Chametz is Chametz even in 1,000th part of whatever it's in. So people are extra stringent around Passover, even when it comes to ingredients, because even by American food labeling laws, something that is less than 1/50th of the ingredients doesn't have to be on the label. And so all the more so, that wouldn't catch chametz that might have been in there from the process. However, it's really up to you to decide how punctilious you're going to be. And so if you're okay with corn oil and soy oil, if you're okay with looking at the ingredients and trusting that the manufacturer didn't have anything in there, that's entirely up to you. Miriam asks, vis-a-vis bitul chametz, so it won't be forbidden to eat food that you overlooked moving for Passover. Let me rephrase this. So Miriam asks, vis-a-vis the bitul chametz, so it wouldn't be forbidden to eat food that you overlooked, cleaning for Passover, if you say the void blessing. So I wouldn't. So let me clarify. If you overlooked a Twinkie and you declared it null and void, that doesn't mean you can eat the Twinkie, because if you are canceling it, if you are disavowing it, then you no longer own it. You shouldn't eat chametz in any form during Passover if you're trying to keep Passover. So it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that if you forgot to get the Twinkie out of your cabinet, you can eat the Twinkie. It means that when you see the Twinkie, throw the Twinkie away and you're fine. All right, this has been a wonderful session. We started off with, all right, everybody, this has been a wonderful live studio session. For me, anyway, I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too. Live session of the Jew Curious Show. Thank you to everybody in our live studio audience for bringing your great questions And thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. If you got something out of it, if you enjoyed it, let me know by weighing in the iTunes review area. Check us out on iTunes. Just look for the Jew Curious Show, and I would be overwhelmed with gratitude if you would take just a second to leave us the appropriate number of stars and maybe a little note, what you think of this show, what we're doing right, what we could be doing righter. I would encourage that kind of feedback as well. If you want to meet and socialize with other people who are listeners to this show, I highly recommend the Jew Curious Community Center. You can find that by going to jewcurious.show/JCC, and there you can sign up and get instructions on how to join a private, carefully tended, lovingly guarded, troll-free Facebook community where you can share your stories with other Jew-curious people like that, ask your questions, answer other people's questions, love the community that's building up there. And finally, if you want to take your Jewish learning to the next level, I highly recommend you check out the Jew Curious School. Go to jewcurious.school/info to find out how to learn with Jew-curious people just like you. Enjoy a supportive, warm, loving community. Do some good learning as well. We have 3 live sessions a week on the Torah portion of the week, a topic of the month, and our ongoing Introduction to Judaism class. But most of all, I love the community that is forming in there as well. And it's the members of the Jew Curious School who make this podcast possible. So check that out at jewcurious.school/info to see if it's right for you. In any case, I have enjoyed learning with you all tremendously today. And until next time, Hero, peace. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. As Kathy says, if you're still in the audience and you've stuck it out through the whole thing, I highly recommend that you hit the like or dislike. Maybe you stuck out the whole thing, didn't find anything good, hit the dislike button. But certainly, if you liked this today, hit the little thumbs up there on Facebook to let us know. And that also helps other people find this as well if it's useful for them. Just a reminder, tomorrow we are going to be talking about the 4 questions. And maybe I'll even sing. Maybe I'll sing Manish Tana. So it's rare that I volunteer to sing on this podcast, but I will maybe sing for people who want a recording to practice that. And so we'll talk about the 4 questions, what the one answer is to all 4 of those questions. And then Thursday, we're going to talk about the 4 children, the 4 types of children that appear in the Magid section. Part of the Magid is the 4 questions. Part of the Magid is the 4 children. There's the wise child, the wicked child, the simple child, and the child that doesn't know how to ask. This is a framework of inclusive Jewish learning, meaning for each of these 4 types of children, we're instructed to teach the Passover story a different way. And that means that the story is so important that we can't just teach it once in one way. We have to take into account all the different dispositions, learning styles, capacities to understand, because it's so important that we get this message across that we need to teach it to each person according to their aptitude and level of curiosity, or not, in the case of the wicked child. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that on Thursday. And then on Friday, we will have another broadcast. We're doing, on Fridays lately, we've been doing the Torah portion of the week. This week's Torah portion is not one of the typical parshiot. It is the Torah portion that's specifically for Passover morning services. But we'll talk about that Torah portion on Friday. So thanks again for joining me, everybody. If you're part of the Jew Curious School, you will have our normal weekly lessons. We're starting. We'll do our weekly Torah portion on Pesach. We will do our new mini course. I'm not exactly sure what the topic is, but I will by then, and so will you. And then we're having our intro class. I think we're going to talk a little bit about the high holidays, which feels weird during Pesach, but that's what's on the schedule. So in any case, really enjoyed learning with all of you today. Really grateful how people support each other in the chat, share different ideas, share resources. That's what learning in a community is all about, and couldn't do it without you. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. And until next time, heroes, peace.